So here it is, it's the Champions Trophy final review. Now I've let the dust settle a little bit since the final. There was a whole heap of celebrations, and quite rightfully so from an India's perspective. I stayed awake till about 7:30 a.m. that day in New Zealand, so I had a damn good sleep afterwards, refreshed, and then coming back with my thoughts in terms of exactly how the final unfolded and pretty much where to from here for both the Indian side and the New Zealand side. As I talked in the lead up to the match, very much the two best sides at the Champions Trophy. And I think in the end, a very fair reflection, the only unbeaten side of the tournament was India, and they obviously went on to win the trophy. It was a really fine performance, and I guess the thing that stood out from India's perspective is that so many different players performed at key moments throughout the whole tournament. They didn't rely on one person. And I guess an example of that is when you look at the top four scorers from Indians' perspective throughout the tournament: Shreyas, Virat, Shubman and Rohit. Rohit was like 180 runs. Shreyas was up to like 250, 260, and the other two were in the middle. So they relied on those four core players. We know Akshar Patel played some valuable innings. KL Rahul did the same in terms of that finishing, as did Hardik Pandya. So, and on that matter, Ravindra Jadeja also chipped in, not only just in the final, but in another match throughout the tournament as well. And him coming in at 8 showed the depth that India had from a batting point of view. So it wasn't just your established players, it was also the new faces. And the one that springs to mind, Varun Chakravarti. Now, he was a late addition to the squad, Indian squad for the Champions Trophy on the back of the series against India. He brought a point of difference. He was absolutely ideal in those conditions for India. And I guess the thing that I liked is that it was always an attacking option for Rohit Sharma to call upon. And he had the option of either Kuldeep, who he brought on, and Kuldeep was outstanding in the final, picking up those 2 wickets of Rachin Ravindra first ball, and then Kane Williamson. So 2 massive players. Now, Kuldeep would have gone into that final under a bit of pressure, because we know that his performances in world events haven't been anywhere near the quality that they have been in bilateral series. So kudos to Kuldeep, but then Rohit can call on Varun Chakravarti and say, look, I want to make sure I've got an attacking option happening at one end at all times. And that's a great skill for a captain to have. Now, often they would have a guy like Bumrah. They could do that. They couldn't call on him. And Shami, the conditions really didn't suit him, other than potentially with the new ball. So, real luxury for Rohit Sharma to have all those attacking weapons in that quartet of spinners. And the 2 left-arm spinners, Akshar and Jadeja, were outstanding as well. They bowled 38 overs of spin in that final, and they very much squeezed New Zealand. And I'll talk about New Zealand's approach a little bit later on, but I think there also needs to be kudos to the Indian bowlers for squeezing during that period. Now, the other good news from an Indian point of view is pretty much after the final, both Virat and Rohit said, hey, we're not gone yet. We certainly haven't retired. And there was a lot of talk leading up to the World Cup that these two this would be the end of the Champions, at the end of the Champions Trophy. Whereas both, I think, are eyeing the Cricket World Cup in South Africa, Zimbabwe and Namibia in 2027. For me, it's about a balance. So ideally, you want to arrive at that World Cup. You've got these two here, both fit and firing, and you can choose to play them. But simultaneously, you also need to make sure that your succession plan is happening at the same time. And I guess the beauty from Indians' cricket perspective is that there is so much depth. So you're not going to struggle to find somebody else who can bat at 3, somebody else who can open for India. There is a plethora of high quality. So the transition has to almost happen side by side, and same with the leadership. You know, there's a lot of talk around, Shubman Gill was the vice captain. You got Shreyas Iyer, who's had some experience from a captaincy point of view. Hardik obviously has done the T20 side in the past. They need to decide who they're going to have as, I guess, the person who's going to operate beside Rohit in case he's not there. And they need to give him enough opportunities captaining India between now and that World Cup in about 2.5 years' time. So it's a long way away and a lot of cricket to be played there, but there needs to be a plan in place. And whether it's they're going to provide a lot of opportunities for Shubman, whether they're going to play off Shubman and Shreyas so that when they arrive, they're going to have options, or whether Hardik comes back into the equation or not. Those are decisions and discussions that are going to need to take place from an Indian perspective. Obviously, Bumrah is going to come back, so we know conditions will change. If Jasprit Bumrah is added to that squad, that squad becomes pretty jolly formidable. And I think there's no doubt it will be stronger come the World Cup. And other than Shami, who also has injury concerns, and I think both Bumrah and Shami potentially won't play in the same side together. They might even share the load between the two, hoping that both could be available at 2027, but they need to get opportunities into the likes of Arshdeep, Harshid Rana, Mohammad Siraj. Those guys have to still be firing because you're going to need at least 3 seamers by the time you get to this World Cup in 2027, so the shape of that bowling attack will be quite different. I guess the scary thought, and it is a scary thought for, I'm over here in New Zealand, I'm a New Zealand supporter, but I'm basically, I spend a lot of time in India and indeed in Asia, and the scary thought is that India really are in the middle of creating a dynasty. And if you look at this record here, the last 3 World Cups, India have won 23 out of 24 matches. So I've counted the Champions Trophy in a World Cup. So 2023 World Cup, only match they lost was to Australia in the semi-final, and that was on the back of a Travis Head masterclass. So it required somebody to play absolutely like Superman to get India out of the way in that final. Obviously, they won the T20 World Cup in the West Indies, first trophy they won in a few years, and then obviously the Champions Trophy they've gone through unbeaten. So that record is exceptional. 23 out of 24 at world events. You just don't get that. Even thinking back to the best sides of Australia, through that era of the early 2000s, that number, and to me, that number could only potentially get better in the years to come. With 26 World Cup, obviously in India and Sri Lanka, and then 27, which is, as I said, in Africa. So the bulk of that squad will be the same. So look out, world cricket. I also want to talk about New Zealand. Obviously, they made the final. They were beaten by a better side, India in Dubai, so they will be a little bit frustrated that they've basically got to another final. They haven't quite brought home the silverware, but I think they also can be immensely proud of the way they've played as a side. Let's just talk about the final from New Zealand's point of view. Were they too conservative after Kuldeep took the wickets of Ravindra and Kane Williamson? At the time, I thought they were. I was looking at it. There was a lot of overs of spin of Kuldeep, Chakravarti, Akshar bowled tidily, and the likes of Mitchell, Latham to a degree, and then Phillips clearly decided that they had to resurrect the innings and try and get New Zealand to a point where in the last 10 to 12 overs they could push and try and get a pass score or even maybe an above pass score. So New Zealand, for that period, they really did get squeezed. They weren't even looking for boundaries. It was very much a manoeuvre the ball for ones, a lot of dots and a lot of pressure of a build-up. Daryl Mitchell, for me, once he decided to flick the switch after that second drinks break, he showed how difficult it was against the soft ball and against the Indian spinners. He was trying, absolutely. It was a really gutsy innings to get New Zealand to that point. He couldn't quite kick on to get that bit of cream that New Zealand really needed to help Michael Bracewell get to a pass score, which I think was around 270. I think if New Zealand got 270, which is only 20 more, I think they were very much in the hunt in terms of being able to squeeze. But they just got, they really got held down in those middle overs and couldn't create any momentum. But Michael Bracewell, special mention, that was a very good 50, a pacey 50, and showed that if you really commit to the ball, you could still generate some shots and some power. Obviously, 251 was always going to be difficult to defend, especially without Matt Henry. And I really feel for Matt because he is in the form of his life. He's still the highest wicket taker in the Champions Trophy. And he was a guy who New Zealand really relied on trying to take 1 or 2 wickets up top to be able to hold India to a score in the power play before the spin were able to take over. And it was a big ask, I guess, for Mitchell Satner to try and manoeuvre his bowlers around to be able to defend a score that was well below par. But I thought Mitch Satner did his very best to do that. The only thing I would question is how long the seamers bowled in the power play when Rohit was going as quickly as he did. And I think, looking at it objectively, I thought that we didn't introduce spin until it was too late. Now, I can understand why, because you're trying to get rid of those 10 overs of seam as quick as you can, and the best time to use them, you think, is in that power play. But it did allow Rohit Sharma in India to get way ahead of the game before spin was introduced. So that would be the one thing I would look at from a New Zealand point of view and go, hey, maybe didn't react as quickly as needed to at that time. That said, I thought Mitchell Santner's captaincy, who's really only captained New Zealand for a matter of months, was exceptional throughout the tournament. And even going back to the final, the fact that Santner knew that they were behind the game, so he had to spend his bowling resource. So he had to bowl himself, he had to bowl Michael Bracewell to keep taking wickets through the middle to stay in the game. And he actually squeezed the game out to, obviously, the end of the 49th over, which was an exceptional effort, as I said, with a below-par score. So I thought the captaincy was very, very good. And Mitch Santner was incredibly calm in all the discussions he had, whether it be with the media or with his team. He looked in control. I know Mitch very well. He's a very methodical thinker, understands the game well, and he's, was able to bring that group together. So signs are very promising for New Zealand moving forward with Mitch Santner in charge of that white ball side. Where to from here? Well, they pretty much would have arrived in New Zealand already. They've got a series starting against Pakistan at the end of this week or over the weekend. T20s, 5 T20s, 3 ODIs. They will be without the players who are heading to the IPL. So good chance for New Zealand to grow their depth of players heading into what is to follow in the next few years with World Cup. So great opportunity to grow the base from a New Zealand point of view. But all in all, Champions Trophy winners India thoroughly deserve the title. Congratulate you. I know there's been plenty of celebrations around India, and rightfully so. To Rohit Sharma and his men, well done.